Hello everyone, patching into today's summer update. So we're going to have a look at some analogues for today's summer update. My good friend James Ackrill has been looking at some fairly interesting past data and has created some analogues based on this past data in terms of blocking over the North Pole in April and the effect that this can have subsequently on the summer. Now, I've got a lot of information here, so I'm going to break this up into two parts. This is part one. Have more information next week for part two. So it's going to be a two-parter, really, this one. So I'm going to show you some charts in terms of past years that had extensive blocking over April, first of all, and then I'll show you how this might impact the summer, because we know had a lot of blocking this April. So hang in there. There will be a point to this. As we get towards the latter part of the video, you'll be able to see how all of these years that have a lot of blocking over North Pole panned out in terms of the summer patterns. Very interesting, and I'll say no more than that. But before I get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles on all of the pages. Have a browse through widgets and click through the links if there's any articles that you're interested in. Thanks so much for doing that. There's video ads on most of the pages. I open up the content when you watch my close book up again. It pays the GazOffice.com. Essentially, it allows me to sit here and talk to you via the website, and it's paying for the website, so we don't have to worry about subscription, we don't have to worry about pay-per-view, anything like that, because the ads keep the revenue going, allowing me to sit here and talk to you via GazOffice. So very important that you get involved with the advertising. I know most of you do. Thanks so much for doing that. And just say it's going to be quite a long video, this one. So if you can't watch it all in one sitting, don't worry, it will be kept on the summer updates page. And what else have I got to say? I think I've pretty much exhausted everything I've got to say. Big thank you to James Ackrill for supplying this information to us, of course. I know you'll be watching, James, so big thank you to you. Right, let's get on with it. And we're going to start off with the 500 millibar height to nominally reanalyze for the month just gone, for April 2016. So this is how the 500 millibar heights look for April 2016. A lot of blocking up here over the North Pole, and also got this trough, of course, extending through the western part of Europe down into the Atlantic. This blocking centered over Greenland, but also extending back over the polar field, and that means that we push the trough down into western and central parts of Europe, and of course via that blocking we entrench cold air into the trough. So if you'd had that pattern setting up in January, my word, we would have known about it, because it happened in April. It wasn't all that cold, but it was a colder than average month, and certainly with a lot of extensive blocking over the pole and down into Greenland. Now, looking back to 1950, which normally is as far back as we go with reanalysis, looking back to 1950, there are 17 years that have this level of blocking over the North Pole. So I'm going to go through those Aprils, the 17 of them. We'll have a look at 1953 first of all, and there we go. This is the first one back to 1950, April 1953, showing a lot of high pressure there, centered around Greenland, trough of low pressure, of course, extending down into western parts of Europe. The next year is 1956, April 1956. This one has, again, a lot of blocking over Greenland, has deep trough of low pressure down through central and western parts of Europe, of course, opening the door to cold northerly winds via the blocking to be fed into that trough. The third year is April 1961. This one's a bit different. There's a lot of blocking over the top of the pole, but the trough is more centred out into the Atlantic, interestingly, and also across Scandinavia. So a little bit different, that one. Of course, you're not going to get exact matches every single year. We go through to the next one. I think this is year 4. This is April 1968, showing, again, a lot of high pressure over the pole and extending back in towards Greenland, a trough of low pressure through the Atlantic. This one's got a bit of a ridge across the eastern part of Europe. Year 5 This is April 1973. And this one, again, lots of blocking, particularly through the Atlantic, Northern Atlantic, and it does extend back towards the top of the pole as well. There's that deep trough that you often see with this pattern through central western parts of Europe. The 6th April with extensive blocking. Look at this, it's 1978, April 1978. Loads and loads of blocking up over the top of the pole with that year, and again lots of troughs of low pressure running through the mid-latitudes. The 7th year is 1979, April 1979, and again we've got all of this ridging around Greenland, not quite extending back towards the top of the pole so much with this one, but certainly extensive blocking through Greenland, and it extends down through western parts of Europe as well. If you have a look at the next year, which I think we're up to the 8th year now, this is 1986, April 1986, and again, deep trough of low pressure across central western parts of Europe. There's all of the blocking, this time particularly centred towards Newfoundland and the south of Greenland. So a little bit different with this one, and there's more low pressure over the very top of the pole as well, so a little bit different there, but still broadly the same idea, which is a trough blocking feature, which is a blocking feature, I should say, to the north and west, and a trough over and to the south and east of the UK. The next one is 1988. I think we're up to year 9 now. Now, this one is quite significantly different. We've got quite a bit of blocking over Greenland, but it extends down into the west of Europe with the trough that generally tends to be centred over Western Europe, particularly centred over Scandinavia, and again through the Atlantic. So that one is a little bit different, April 1988, but it still has a lot of blocking around Greenland in particular. It has some similarity to this one. I think we're up to year 10 now, April 1995, and that one shows a lot of blocking up over the pole and extending down into the Atlantic. The trough is less deep and it's more centred over Scandinavia and eastern parts of Europe. But again, it's the blocking over the pole that is the key feature, of course. April 1996 next, we're up to year 11, and again this one shows a lot of blocking up over the pole, particularly around Greenland, extending back in towards the top of the North Pole. Ridge extends down in towards Scandinavia with this one, with a trough through Western Europe and into the Atlantic as well. The 12th year, which is April 1998, well, this one has loads and loads of blocking up over the top of the pole. There we go. High pressure centred over there. Trough of low pressure underneath it through Western Europe. April 1998 was a very cold and wet month. April 1999 is the next, so quite a sequence here through the 1990s, interestingly, the middle and last stages of the 1990s. This is year 13, again blocking across Greenland and a trough of low pressure around the western part of Europe. Less of a trough this time, so that was a little bit different. And they've got another year, 2000, so interesting sequence there of 1998, 1999 and 2000, all of those Aprils having a lot of blocking. This one centres it particularly around Greenland, deep trough again through northern and western parts of Europe. I think we're up to the 14th year now, which is April 2008, and this one again shows high pressure over the pole, trough of low pressure underneath it. Pretty cold, wet month that one was in April 2008. 2010 is next, April 2010. I think we're coming up towards the end now, and we've got the ridge again centred around Greenland, and it's going down in towards western parts of Europe. the trough of low pressure is to the northeast and down into the central part of the Atlantic as well. So that one really is quite different. But the basic idea, again, loads and loads of blocking up over top of the North Pole. And then the last one is April 2012. So this extends the ridge down into Greenland and also through the Atlantic. There's that trough that we often get with this pattern across central and western parts of Europe. Cold northerly winds being entrenched into that trough. Pretty dismal, cold, wet April. That one was. So that's the full 17 Aprils that have all of this blocking over the pole. And of course they differ from year to year. They're not all totally identical, but most of them showing the blocking around Greenland, sometimes extending down to the Atlantic, sometimes extending up to the top of the pole, sometimes even extending ridge down into Western Europe, but most of them actually have a trough of low pressure into the west of Europe. And we actually put all of these together and have a look at all 17 and see how those Aprils look when you put them all together. So this is the reanalysis chart for all of those 17 years. And what you find, if you put all of those years together, is that you get this big ridge centered across Greenland, particularly centered across Greenland, as I say, does sometimes extend to the top of the pole, it sometimes goes down into the Atlantic, but the real centre tends to be around Greenland with those 17 years. And then you tend to get this trough of low pressure through central and western parts of Europe. So that's how the 17 years look when they're all put together. Now, what impact does this have on the summer? Well, we can have a look at the dunes, the 500 millibar heights of the dunes of all of those years. So we can go back to 1953, which was the first year, and combine it with every single year through all of these years that we've looked at, up to the most recent one, which was 2012. And this is how the dunes tend to look with these years. So you tend to get a trough of low pressure around Greenland. You tend to get a trough of low pressure through the Mediterranean. And then often you have a ridge in the Atlantic and a ridge over Scandinavia. So perhaps not too bad, really. What goes on there is that the jet stream does something like that. So you get into quite a complicated pattern, and it can be unsettled at times, but there's enough ridging there to suggest that June can often be a reasonable month. Don't want to go overboard with that, because the trough through the Mediterranean particularly is quite unusual, and this is a deep trough around Greenland and Iceland, which does threaten unsettled conditions to run through the middle of these two ridges. But nevertheless, the ridges are there both to the west and to the east, and perhaps giving somewhat decent weather. If we have a look at the Julys of all of these years, though, look at this. Very, very interesting, because the Julys tend to show a very marked and clear deterioration. So you get blocking re-emerging on average around Greenland and extending down into the Atlantic, and then this really deep trough sets up within most of these years. Remember, some of these years will deviate from this, and what I'm going to do next week actually is show you some of the individual years so you get the idea. But not every single year pans out like this, and it doesn't necessarily mean that 2016 will look like this in July either. It's just when you combine all of the 17 years, this is the reanalysis that you tend to get, and it's a very cool, very unsettled pattern. Again, the ridging re-emerges, the ridge that we see, the blocking that we see in April, it re-emerges across the pole and down into Greenland, and then this deep, deep trough sets up on average throughout these 17 years across northern and western parts of Europe. And then if I show you August, this is how the August tends to look. And again, very, very poor, with lots of ridging around Greenland and extending back into the top of the pole as well. And then this deep trough, it's still there. It's aligned differently, but it's still there through August across much of northern and western Europe. I think the August probably go more westerly, could be very wet indeed, bit of an Atlantic onslaught within these 17 years as that trough of low pressure runs through. So if you combine all of those 17 years and you combine all of the June, Julys and August, all of the summer months of those 17 years, this is what we end up with as the reanalysis for the summers of those years. And it's pretty grim, you have to say. All of these years that have blocking in April, in the summers, the reanalysis shows this, a very, very deep trough across northern, western parts of Europe, the ridge through the Atlantic, blocking over the pole, possibly down into Scandinavia as well. And remember, June isn't as bad as the other 2 months, July and August. If you were to take June out of this and just show a reanalysis for July and August, it would be much worse than this. Actually, I think with the blocking even more extensive around Greenland in particular. So it's a clear pattern that we see here, that years that have lots of northern blocking over Greenland and into the pole in April, they tend to be years that have a lot of blocking over Greenland and into the pole through the summer months, and particularly focus on July and August, with June probably tending not to be as bad as the other 2. Now, as I say, within these years there are deviations, so I'll just go back to one of those years, which is 1995. It's this one, just here, which has a lot of blocking over pole in April 1995. And well, it's a little bit different, being in that the ridging extends down into western parts of Europe, and the trough is more towards the east of Europe. So that one was a bit different in the April, and we had a very hot and dry summer. It was a real drought that summer. So it's not quite as clear-cut, of course, as the reanalysis would imply, which, of course, again, reminder of it, when you put all the 17 years together, that's how it looks, and it is very grim. But there are a few years in there that aren't as bad in the summer months, which 1995 in particular. So what we're going to do for part 2 is I want to have a look at some of these individual summers. So we set the scene now, you know the idea, which is that blocking in April often coincides with poor summers, and overall it does favour a cooler, wetter and duller than average summer. But there are years that deviate. We'll have a more in-depth look at those years individually next week. We've also got some more information from James in terms of data sets I want to share with you for the centering temperatures of these summers and all of that kind of thing. So part 2 will be with you next week on Sunday. This is all building up, remember, to the GavsWeathers.com Summer 2016 forecast, which is going to be released the last Sunday of May. I nearly said April there. Be released the last Sunday of May. Been a very, very long day. I'm really sorry about that. Be released the last Sunday of May, which is the 29th of May. So that's where we'll be releasing our summer forecast. This is all setting the picture for that summer forecast. Hope you found the video interesting. If you couldn't watch it all in one go, it will be kept at GavsWeathers.com on the summer updates page. Definitely there'll be a written summary of everything that you've seen here added to the summer updates page later on as well. How long have I been going on for? Under 20 minutes. I've done this one pretty well, actually, I think. So that's all for now, and thanks very much for watching. Come back for part 2 next Sunday. Bye for now.